Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayot. On this episode, I sit down with someone I've known for more than 30 years, Bona Normandeau. Originally from small town Saskatchewan, Bona joined the military to see the world, and she did just that with the Royal Canadian Navy. Since leaving the military, she's had a number of jobs, all with a focus on helping people. The main reason I wanted to have her on the show was to talk to her about her work to help people find their happy with content such as her The Happier You podcast. This was such a fun discussion, and I'm truly grateful for having had the chance to reconnect with a friend. I hope you enjoy this episode with Bona Normandeau. Gage, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming by the house.
Thanks for having me. This is pretty cool.
We were talking previously about Saskatchewan and some potential links with our family history, and we'll get into yours in a second. But I was talking to my dad the other day, just confirming about where our family was in Saskatchewan, and it was in Wolseley, where my great grandfather had a hotel, restaurant, guest house, something like that. I think like right on the highway.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the connection is there somewhere, because I think we were talking about how.
So my grandpa owned like a car dealership and then gas station on the highway in Wolseley.
Right.
So that's where my mom grew up and worked there as a teenager kind of thing. Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a connection, because I'm imagining it was not a big town back in the day.
Nope, I don't think so, and it still isn't.
So why don't we start there about where the two sides of your family came from, and then we can get into a little bit of you growing up in Saskatchewan.
For sure, yeah. So my mom is from Wolseley, Saskatchewan, and born and raised, and then she moved to Regina as graduated high school, got a job, I think, or was going to school, I can't remember, and a guy from her hometown brought this new British guy to the party. So my dad is born and raised in England, and he couldn't get a loan for a used car. They'd only give him a loan for a new car, and he didn't want a new car, couldn't afford a new car. And so he just got frustrated, answered an ad to come work as a teacher in Saskatchewan, and picked a small town on the map that was on the number 1 highway, and took the boat across to Canada, arrived Montreal, took the train through to the small town Broadview where I was born and raised, and then his friend Alan picked him up, took him to a party in the city, and met my mom and dad, and the rest, as they say, is history. That was the start of us.
So this wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't necessarily be here today if he'd got a car loan in England?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, crazy, right?
So it had to have been more than that. Did your dad have a sense of adventure? Did he see that there was really no opportunities in England? Like, do you ever get a chance to sort of chat with him about? Because I would imagine it's more than just not getting a car loan. That was probably the straw.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you say that, right? Because that's the story that my dad tells. But my dad very much it's a principle of the matter kind of guy. Like, you do that because it's the right thing to do. And so I could see him just thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. And he already had at least two friends who had come over as teachers to Canada and Saskatchewan in particular. So I think that sort of helped, that there was opportunity, and it felt like, there was more opportunity there than he was getting in England. So I think because friends had come in front of him, there were friends over there and they were happy. So I don't know that I would consider my dad sort of an adventure guy, but obviously to move at a young age, across the Atlantic Ocean, and then across, halfway across the northern continent, North American continent, like, I guess there was a bit of adventure there. It's just not the way I looked at my dad.
How did he adapt to Saskatchewan, to Canada? We could talk about winters, but
Oof. Yeah. So it's really interesting because my dad, as a new young teacher, I know he moved in, rented a room from a local lady.
Right.
And then it's such a small town, right? So Broadview is 600-ish people. And he just got enveloped into the community. Like, you know, he put his money, like his bank account was at the credit union. And so there's a membership. It's the local people who buy shares in the credit union. So I feel like he just got enveloped and became part of the town and lived there for over 30 years and was the town in the end. So in that sense, I think he got welcomed in. And as a teacher, you're nurturing the local children. So very quickly, you know, even growing up, I saw so many people came to the door and just wanted to say hi to Mr. Chester. And that really struck me at how big of a difference my dad made in people's lives, that they would stop in and say hi to him, you know, as they were home visiting family. It was very, very impactful for me, the difference that my dad made in people's lives just because he cared.
That sense of community, I think, is so powerful. I mean, jumping around a little bit here, did you ever sort of long for that when you left Saskatchewan and wanting that more sort of tight-knit community, or did you find it along the way?
Well, it's interesting because I love teamwork. Like, I really, you know, we joined the military and immediately your recruit camp, you had your team. And then I was on the volleyball team, so I had that community. And then I joined the Navy, and each ship you're on is a team, it's a community. And so I've found throughout my life, I love being a part of something bigger, of having a team and working towards a common goal. And I think sometimes I wonder if that's where I came from. Like, I didn't go to a big university and sit in classes of, you know, 1,200 people. I went to a very small military college where the max size was 60, and by the time we were third and fourth year, it was, you know, 12 to 15.
Yeah.
So I think I've always been in the smaller community where I know more people. And I've found, as my husband and I have moved around, we feel a part of community when we know our neighbors and you're watching out for each other and taking care of each other. That's just who we are. We form a community wherever we go. So I think that's my roots from coming from a small town.
Yeah. So your dad was a teacher. What would your mom do?
My mom did teacher's aide. And so everybody went to school every day.
Yeah.
And mom helped, challenged students at school and just nurtured them through school. So, yeah.
Same school?
Same. Oh, yeah. I mean, 600 people, remember?
I'm assuming, but...
Yeah, the elementary and the high school were connected, so they all went to school.
And what did your childhood look like? What did you spend your time doing? What were your interests as you grew up?
Well, small town, so sports, and more sports, pretty much. Although, you know, I say that, and I realize how lucky we were. We had music in our small town. So I got a little bit of the arts. I don't consider myself an artistic person, but looking at how some people have to fight to get more artistic stuff in their lives, we had that in such a small town. But yeah, sports, it was my everything. So from, I think, the day I hit the ground running, that's what I did. Yeah.
Did you like school?
Yeah, I was good at it. It was fairly easy for me. So, and my dad paid me when I got A's. So I'm sure that helped.
That definitely would help. Now, at what point did you sort of look past the end of school and say, like, this is what I want to do when I'm done in high school? When did that sort of start to form in your mind?
So it became very clear. I think I was grade 7, my sister was grade 9, and there was sort of the traveling career day that came to our small town, and it doesn't come every year. And only grade 9 and up, I think, was allowed to go. And my dad came home from that and said, Bona, I think I found something that would interest you. And he told me about the military and being able to go to military college and be a pilot. And from then on, that's what I was going to do when I grew up. And that traveling career day never came back to our school.
Oh, really?
In the next 4 years, it never came back. But that idea planted, and I went with it. It was where I was going to go. So then I researched military college, and that's where I went in grade 11.
Your dad, so because you were too young to go, your dad actually was the one who vectored you onto it.
Yeah. Yeah, because Dad was a teacher, right? So he was in all the presentations, and I guess, yeah. I have no idea what it looked like because I was too young to go, so.
So your dad vectors you onto this, and then as you start going down the path of saying, this is what I want to do, I'm assuming then you had that sort of full support of of your parents, because your dad's the one who sort of said, hey, have a look at this.
I had the full support of my parents, absolutely, because we lived an hour and a half from the city. So even once it got to the application process and in getting different letters, but even the drives into Regina to do the interview and the testing and all that stuff, they had to take me. And it's interesting because I had the support of my parents until the day that I got accepted. And then my parents kind of said, are you sure you want to go? And because I left home, because I went to CMR, the Quebec side of, the military college, as you know, I could leave after grade 11. So I didn't actually do my grade 12 year. I left my friends and joined the military. And my parents were, I think, a little bit heartbroken, but at the same time, they wanted to make sure that it's what I really wanted. And so my dad said, if you're doing this just to leave small town Saskatchewan, we will move. And I had been asking my parents to move somewhere bigger, I think, for years. And maybe that's why my dad suggested military for me, because he knew I was looking for adventure. I guess from a young age, because if he told me in grade 7, there must have been, some way that I talked, but I think I was always looking for more adventure than I was getting in my small town. And so the fact, and I'd asked, and my dad's like, no, this is a great place to raise a family. It's such a supportive community. This is where I'm raising my kids. And so he would never move. And so the fact that he didn't want me to go to military college and was willing to move for me really spoke deeply to me of how much they loved me and supported me. But the problem was I'd already decided that was what I wanted to do, and I was ready for my big adventure. So, and because I was adamant that that's what I wanted, they were absolutely supportive. But there was just this little blip that kind of tested me to say, are you sure? Because we will uproot our whole life if you're doing this just to get out of small town. So
it's amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think probably really well timed. Like, they picked their moment, because it's now real, right? It's now real that you've been accepted. It's not so far along that you can't sort of say, change your mind.
Right.
But that's amazing, having parents that were that sort of insightful. Because, now I think there's so much out there about being mindful and, and having a look at people's situations and, where your kids are at, or where people who are important to you are at, that it almost becomes, it's easy enough to dismiss, I guess, now, to go, oh, of course you were looking at your kids and saying, I want to make sure that they're sure about this, because there's 1,000 resources and everything online talks about these sort of things. But to be doing that back in the sort of 1990, 1991,
early 90s,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
to have that sort of insight from your parents. So did you get the adventure you were looking for in the military?
Absolutely.
Or at CMR, College Militaire Royal?
Yeah, I did. So because it was CMR, we didn't do basic training before military college. So we just went straight into recruit camp at the end of the summer. And then in spring break, or reading week, I joined, the qualification was air operations, which meant I wanted to be a pilot, but I hadn't passed air crew selection yet.
Okay.
And so during our spring break of that prep year, we went to Toronto and did air crew selection, and I epically failed. It was a disaster. And what I realized was, I thought I wanted to be a pilot, but I fell in love with the military and the teamwork and the adventure that I was already on. So I quickly figured out what else I could do as a 18-year-old I still wanted to stay here. So I had to find another trade or occupation to go into that that still excited me because I wasn't leaving. I'm like academically things were going fine. But I just loved it. I was on my adventure and I wasn't going back.
Were you pushed in any particular direction to go to a specific trade?
No, not that I remember. I think logistics was an easy one because I was studying administration, business admin, arts is where I was heading towards at the time. And so I obviously couldn't be an engineer, not that I wanted to or would have ever made it, but there was only a few that I could look at, right? And I just decided that I wanted adventure again, so I wasn't ready to ride a desk and be an admin person. So I chose the Navy because they told me I could see the world and I wouldn't be sitting behind a desk. So, yeah.
I think the Navy's been using the same recruiting pitch for centuries. See the world.
But you really do. You really do. You know, this small town girl from Saskatchewan, my very first trip with the Navy, we set sail to the west and didn't come back for 3 months, sorry. So I didn't and that happened to me a few times, whereas by the time, you know, other friends in the Navy had sailed around Vancouver Island and done sort of the west coast of BC, I had only ever sailed, like we'd say, past Boyd Juliet, which was the marker to come into the Straits, to come into Victoria or Canadian waters. I'd only ever sailed out past Boyd Juliet and then out west. So I really, when you say, did I get my adventure? Absolutely. I got to see at least a lot of the Pacific in my time in the Navy. It was amazing.
How was that transition coming out of high school? Well, you hadn't finished high school at that point, coming out of small town Saskatchewan into small town Quebec and this military environment. Was that an easy transition? Was that, like, how did you manage that piece?
Easy. No, I don't think transition is ever easy, but I think what worked for me was it wasn't too big. It was always a small community and a team. As you know, you go into a squadron and that's your family. And even if you change squadrons, that's your new family. Like there's always, I found in the military, there was always somebody looking out for you and was responsible to make sure you were developing as you were supposed to. So I always said that it was good for me. I thrive in structure when I know what's expected of me. So I didn't have to figure out how to get myself to class on time because we were up doing our workouts at 6:30 in the morning. And then we had, some days it was 15 minutes to have breakfast. And then we were back and changed and in class in uniform. Like it was so structured. And I always say I left mom and dad helping me, be responsible to, I just followed the routine. I knew exactly what was expected of me. And so that part made the transition easy for me because I didn't have to figure much out except for who to salute and who not to salute.
I don't think I've heard it framed that way before. Is it like the transition wasn't that big? I think that's a great way to frame it in terms of whether it be the size of the organization you're going into, the fact that structure helps to reduce a lot of that uncertainty. But that's a really great way to frame it, especially I think if you look at people who are leaving the military and that kind of transition, because that transition can be really big because it's like you're going into open water now. And a lot of that structure is harder to find. And there's so many more decisions that you need to make on your own for what right looks like for you personally, as opposed to you've been in this organization that's made a lot of those decisions for you, whether you like them or not. The current's just taking you in that direction. So, yeah, I really like the way that you framed that because I haven't heard it before, and it intrinsically makes a lot of sense to me. You talk about you failing aircrew selection. Was that the first sort of big failure you had in life?
It was actually my second.
Okay.
My first was because I left high school in grade 11 and the way our small town structured sciences, I had no physics before I went into military college. So I actually failed my physics midterm in my first year at military college, and that was devastating. I had never failed anything in my life. I'd always highly achieved. So that was very humbling. But again, the system was that my squadron looked at me and said, okay, who can help Bona learn physics? And so they grabbed a second year and they said, Kate, you now are responsible for tutoring her through physics. And, so I went from failing my midterm to nailing my final. And I think that just taught me very quickly how to ask for help or how to look for help and realize that, okay, you're not alone. There's a whole team around you that wants you to succeed. So figure it out and keep moving forward. So when I failed aircrew, again, I think the system just looked at it like, okay, well, you failed, but you're doing great at everything else. So choose another trade.
Right.
And I learned from that. I don't know if I had that before I got there, but I will say that support was very nurturing and really worked for my personality. And that's just how I've dealt with blips on the road ever since. Yeah.
So how do you deal with failure now? Do you fail well, or are you still sort of, because there's not as much structure now?
Yep.
Right?
I have learned, so it's funny because I say how important a team is for me and being part of a community, and yet now I'm self-employed and completely on my own, and I'm creating a community.
Yeah.
So what I've learned is I seek my mentors now, and I seek out the people who are gonna, hold my feet to the fire or help me course correct when I get lost, or call me out on, okay, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Like, what's your next best step? And so I think I learned that lesson, and now it's harder. I would love people to just magically show up in my life when I need them.
Yeah.
But I've learned that the power of reaching out and finding the right connection, the right mentor for you makes all the difference in the world. So I'm still failing. And I would say now, as much as failure, I don't look at it as necessarily failure. I figure out a way, it's a way not to do something or to learn from something. And I'm a firm believer in that. And so I still don't love not succeeding every time, but I have learned that if I'm failing, I'm moving forward and I'm learning. So it's a growth thing. And that's definitely something that I want to mentor for our son, because I think his generation, they're so afraid of failure because they see perfection and they see the final cut on YouTube or wherever. Yeah. And I really think it's important to know that we fail forward, and that's the only way to move forward. So,
yeah, it is it's a dangerous thing that they get exposed to like that, the final cut, because it really is. So it's either the final cut and you don't see everything leading up to it, or it's actually not even the final cut. It's just some fake version of a final
edited
cut.
Yes.
Somebody actually didn't put in the hard yards for that.
Right.
I had this conversation with a guy named Tim Fleiser, who's a former CFL player. In fact, I think he's the only CFL player to ever win like 4 Grey Cups with different teams. But he talks about the road to hoisting like the Grey Cup or whatever the championship is, and everybody loves that moment, right? Like the Olympians and the gold medal, but they don't see all the failures and the early mornings and the setbacks and the nutrition and all this other stuff that goes into that, right? You get the final cut, which seems wonderful, but unfortunately that doesn't come with the semicolon, however, comma, all this stuff led to that.
Yeah.
And like you said, failure's growth. So if you're not failing, you're not growing, you're not pushing yourself, and it's such an important part of, and then being able to deal with it. Such an important part of life, right? Not letting it derail you. It could be a motivator. It could be a moment where you go, do I want to keep putting my energy into this, or need to make an adjustment?
Right.
Whatever that looks like.
Yeah. The actually analyzing your life and learning from it instead of just judging yourself and walking away from something that could be absolutely beautiful if you just tweaked a couple of things and learned from it and grew from it and said, okay, what's next? And I think that is one of the things that it's interesting, because on my journey, that's one of the things I want to give our son is just that I'm going to be okay. even if I fall on my face, because I'm going to pick myself up, I'm going to learn from it, and then I'm going to move forward. But I have to learn from that experience. I have to be okay with, I have to be the person who's strong enough to pick myself up and go, okay, well, that was embarrassing or that was heartbreaking, but I'm not going to let it stop me from my bigger life that's out there. Mm-hmm. No playing safe and playing small.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't be, sad, disappointed. Those emotions are real, and that's okay. But like you said, don't let it be an impediment to what you want to do, right? Like, give yourself that time to go, well, crap, okay. And then just, all right, what's next?
Yeah. And that's something I've learned on my life journey, is that it's to slow down and acknowledge them, because I don't know about you, but I look at, in the past, it was the emotions were scary and they could really slow me down. And I could be in a funk for days. And that's when I realized, when I was learning and growing, because I'm like, okay, this sucks. And I'm acknowledging where I'm at right now. It hurts. It's embarrassing. It's disappointing. It's heartbreaking. But I don't want to stay here. I feel it, and then I'm going to move through it and say, okay, how can I help myself through this? Or how can I ask for help? And that's it. Life is a roller coaster of those emotions. We just have to learn to love ourselves through them and not shame ourselves for having them or feeling them.
Yeah, easier. I think easier said than done. It's in so many ways, but so important. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I probably continue to struggle with to this day, is this sort of enduring sort of imposter syndrome that I know a lot of people talk about, and like, what's motivating you to do something? Is it a positive motivation, or is it this sort of motivation that is tied to whatever? Like I said, I can call it imposter syndrome, but whether it's being enough, or why are you putting energy into this? Is it for a good, healthy reason, or is it for another reason that's maybe less healthy? But I'm sure we can get into more of that in...
get me started on that, Chris, and we'll be here for hours.
So why don't we talk about the Navy a little bit? So you finished up military college. You had, as you mentioned, you decided to join the Royal Canadian Navy. And what was your trade in the Navy?
So I was a Mars officer. That's what it was called at the time. We were essentially the ship drivers. So in line, we worked our way up to be the captain of the ship. It's now called Naval Warfare Officer.
Right.
Which is probably a little bit easier for people to understand, from a recruiting marketing standpoint.
Yeah, what did MARS stand for?
Maritime, Surface, and Subsurface. So,
okay.
Yeah. I know. It kind of made sense, but not really.
Military acronyms. Some of them are just bizarre.
Yeah. So I got, at a very young age, I learned to drive the ship and be in charge of, the whole crew on board. It was a lot of responsibility and some very intense situations as you get your ticket and drive the ship. It was a very formative years for me, being that responsible in that level of stress. And that much information flowing into me. Now I look back at it, I'm like, I don't think I could do that anymore. That was a lot of, multitasking, lots of information. But at the time, you say, did I get my adventure? I absolutely did. Sailing through the Straits of Singapore. I'll never forget looking at the radar, thinking there's no clear path in. There's so many dots on this radar. I'm not making it through, it was... but you just follow the steps, you follow your training, and you get yourself through, and you've got your team. Sailing into Sydney, Australia, phenomenal. Teaching aerobics in Tonga because our ship stopped there, and that was one of the events our captain asked us to do was teach aerobics, so we did. It was just, I saw so much, so many things, met so many people. And again, it's that team aspect, the crew, you're on board, your shift work through the night, you're trying to keep each other focused and awake when there's nothing going on at 3:00 in the morning. And yeah, it's just amazing memories and adventures. Yeah.
You were sharing with me in a previous conversation about, it's called the Tiger Cruise.
Yes. Yeah.
And I love that story because I think it, we're not that old, but it does harken back to a time where I think the military had a far better balance of these sort of events that were fun and meaningful, and it wasn't just all work all the time. Can you maybe tell the Tiger Cruise story and what that is? And I don't know if they still do them or not.
You know what? I'm sure they must. They must. So a Tiger Cruise, in this instance, we were on a 6-month deployment to the Persian Gulf. And on the way back, we stopped in Australia, and a bunch of the crew got to go home. So then there's empty bunks on board. So then we got to invite our family to do a portion of the trip with us from one port to the other. So they flew down to Australia and came on board and got to see our life on board a Navy ship. So my dad came down, and my dad actually had a cousin who left England and went to Australia, and my dad left England and went to Canada. So we got to see family down there as well, but I got to bring my dad on board the ship. And I specifically asked for the mids because I wanted my dad to come up, and the mids is approximately midnight till 4 a.m.
So that's the shift you asked for.
I asked for it because I wanted my dad. I wanted to pull him out of bed in the middle of the night and say, "Come on, Dad, wake up, brush your teeth, let's go." And but the sea was so rocky. It was actually very dangerous. And I went to my dad's cabin and I said, "You're not coming with me." I think he tried and he couldn't get up the ladder.
Yeah.
It was so rocky. And actually he woke up in the morning and the Secure for Sea wasn't as effective as it should have been, and his cabin was trashed. It wasn't his cabin, but the cabin he was staying in was trashed. But I'm like, well, he got to see real life at sea. He didn't get to do my 4-hour shift with me on the bridge, but he got to see the real thing. So, the furniture moving, sliding around in the wardroom for supper as we're taking the heavy seas. We couldn't sit down. We didn't even set up the tables. It was so rough. So, yeah, so we got to see what it's like at sea. It was fun.
That's got to be amazing as a parent to be able to see your child in their environment, right, as a professional doing their job, especially when it comes to something I think that is, for most Canadians, pretty esoteric, the military. Very little exposure to it, really a culture and a profession that is hard to wrap your mind around. So actually getting a chance to get that level of exposure.
And such immersion into it, right?
Yeah.
I always remember, actually, it was fun having my dad there and seeing my world, but it was really sweet when he said, my friend Allison was a pilot on the helicopters, and my dad tells everybody, I was just so amazed that tiny little thing could fly that massive helicopter, right? And I never really thought I never really thought about it because we're from the generation where if that's what I wanted to do, that's what I did. I applied for the military, I got into the military, and Allison passed air crew selection, obviously, and flew helicopters, and he just was so amazed that she could do that and land it on a moving ship. That was the other thing. And that was sort of the fun part of having him at sea is you could see Allison fly a helicopter, but watching her land it on a moving ship, that's a whole other impressive act to witness. So yeah, it was cool.
Was there ever a moment on that theme of you could do whatever you wanted to do, where you felt like there was things being put in your way that you weren't being encouraged to do whatever you wanted to do?
No, I've been really lucky. I hear stories about other people running up against things, but I never felt that. I always felt, in fact, I had mentors in the Navy who wanted to see women rise, and they were encouraging, going all in. And in the end, I left the Navy when the next job up did not interest me. And, that was the one that I was being encouraged to go for, to keep progressing and get more women higher up in the Navy. And it just really didn't call to me. So I didn't go there, but many of my friends did, and now are strong female leaders in the Navy. but I never felt held back. I mean, there might be one or two people who didn't love having women around, but they never had a big play on my career at all.
I asked the question, and it wasn't necessarily a you as a woman. It was probably more broad, but whether it be you as a woman, bosses who are not, supportive of you, personally, whatever that looks like. Because I mean, I can probably pinpoint the moment, like almost down to the moment where my career could have gone one way or the other. And I think I was a lieutenant at the time. And I had a boss who really didn't like me. And there's probably some very justifiable reasons for that in terms of like who I was at that moment, in terms of a level of aggression and arrogance I don't think was helpful. But fortunately for me, the commanding officer at the time saw it very differently, right? Saw potential and could look through my faults and could look through some of my immaturity, and luckily for me, that was that person outranked the one who didn't like me. So that sort of allowed me to continue to move forward, because certainly the Army at the day, if you were sort of earmarked as someone who was not liked or who didn't have potential as a 22-year-old, right? Like that could very much be the end of it. So I think my question, it had a multitude of potential ways to go with it. So I'm always encouraged to hear that people spent their time in the military and really felt like they had a lot of agency about what they could and couldn't do.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you reframe the question like that, I think for sure there was always people who had other ideas where they could see us going. I don't know. I was a West Coaster. I got to do some amazing adventures. I got into recruiting when I wanted to get into recruiting. That was a big coup for me to get that job. That was really a fun and interesting turn in my career. So I don't know. I just feel blessed for the opportunities that I got. And I didn't always get what I wanted, but I'm the kind of personality that is like, okay, well, how do I make the best of this? So I'm here for a reason. Let's do our best and make the best of it. And I think that's, because I got moved around a few times and wasn't necessarily my choice, but it worked. And like I said, I got that recruiting job that I really was looking forward to. So I feel like it all worked out.
Yeah, it's a great quality to have is finding the gold in any opportunity or any situation, and the fact I think you have that at a young age is great, and probably speaks volumes about some of the things that you're doing now. Is that you had that attitude. So what was you sort of mentioned that you got to a point in your career in the Navy where the next job or the next sort of band of jobs didn't really have much of appeal to you. So like what was the sort of lead up to that? And you said, okay, this is the right time to leave. And like, did you have a plan for what you wanted to do when you left? Or did you just sort of say, okay, well, this has run its course, this chapter. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I don't leave anywhere without a plan. That's not...
Me neither.
No.
I almost got anxious asking the question.
Please don't say yes. Please don't say yes. So on the ship, I always knew that next level didn't appeal to me, like, because that's who I worked for in the operations room as an airborne controller. And I was like, I don't want to do your job. There's no appeal to do that for me at all. So I always knew it was coming. Plus, I was getting older and wanted to start a family and didn't necessarily want to have children and leave them at home while I sailed. So it was a natural ending to my Navy career after I got the recruiting job, which, was shore-based. And then the next thing I did for just before releasing from the military was teaching at the Naval Officer Training Center, and that was amazing too. But yeah, I was done with the going to sea, and that job really didn't appeal to me, the warfare side of things. So So I think it was fairly natural. It was planned for. It was a normal progression. And then and then I actually got out and started getting into sales, which I had already started while I was in the Navy. So it was an easier transition because I had a community to go to. Because one of the things I found once I got out was when the fleet sailed, 90% of my friend group was gone. And because the Navy really is a family, and your social group was often who you went to sea with. And so when I went ashore to do the recruiting job, which was still in Victoria, but it was ashore, I realized very quickly, okay, I need to expand my friend group, my community, because when they all leave, it's very lonely. And that's not who I am. I need people. So that was good for me. Again, there was growth, and then I went into sales, which is a very lonely and humbling adventure, but it came with a group of people. So then I just expanded my friend group and moved on.
So why did you pick sales?
I think it was not natural for me. It was just the opportunity that presented itself, and it was there, and I could do it while I was at the end of my career in the Navy. I kind of got my feet wet and realized I could do it. And it ended up, it was sales, but the way I sold it to myself, it was helping people. So I started selling Mary Kay Cosmetics, which still makes me giggle because I was the world's biggest tomboy, and it was way outside my comfort zone. And I think that's part of the reason I did it. But I'd always been very insecure, and it had great skincare. I started feeling better about myself, a little bit of confidence, and then I could help other people feel that confidence. So that was sort of my foray into sales. And then, a few years into that, then I actually switched over to mortgages, which in a way, you're self-employed again, and you're pitching yourself, but it was helping people. And so I found that was most definitely I love to help people. That's, if there's anything I can do to make your life better, that makes me feel good.
The framing is so important. I mean, I've had this conversation on sort of the sales side. I don't know if you've had it with people who are still serving, and especially in Ottawa, being this sort of defense industry, a lot of it's here in Ottawa, and a number of people still serving say, I could never go out and sell anything. I kind of have to remind them, you're selling things all the time, right? You're selling your ideas, right? So your team builds a plan or a strategy, and you have to go and sell this to get it approved, right? You're selling their work, you're selling ideas, you're pitching things constantly. It's just from a bit of a different perspective. So you need to take a moment and understand that, again, like you said earlier, like there's so many opportunities in everything. You just have to find how that speaks to you. And I really like that framing of helping people, because I think that becomes incredibly powerful when you realize that that this work that might have this job title actually is tied to one of the things that's most meaningful in my life, which, whatever that might be for you, for helping people.
Right.
Yeah, and that it just keeps the world far more open.
Yeah, and I think with sales comes rejection, and that's a huge leap for, especially in the military, because you get a new job every 2, maybe 3 years. And so you walk in there with authority because you've earned your way into that next position. Whereas in sales, I think coming from the military, the slide into it is like, oh my gosh, like I have to do this to survive. And that's a very, and when people reject you, they're not saying no to your concept. You can take that very personally, like, oh, they're saying no to me. And I think for me, that's part of what was so nerve-wracking about it. But absolutely, we're selling people on stuff all the time. We're trying to convince them of our way to do things. But yeah, I'm with you. It's humbling, and it's not an easy transition. And it's still to this day, because what I do now, I still have to sell something to make a living. But ultimately, I remind myself that it's not about me. It's about how can I help others? And in order to keep doing it, I do have to pay the bills, right?
Right.
So it's a natural exchange that you learn to get more comfortable with.
How did the mortgage piece come into it?
So funny story about that. I actually, when we bought our first house and we worked with a mortgage broker, I said to her, how do I do what you do? I love this. I love numbers. I love people. This would be the perfect job for me. And she says, oh, well, it's 100% sales. Like, you would have to quit your nice, beautiful salaried job and you would start at zero and you would have to find your own clients. Well, that vision stopped right there. Nope, I was not going to do that. And so it's funny because, Mary Kay is direct sales. It happened a girls' night. I fell in love with the product, and it was a great way to learn more about sales and get my feet wet and understand that process and if I was even capable of doing it on the side while I was still military. So I didn't have to give up my salary to get into it. And then what happened was I did leave the military, ended up doing sales full time. And then the mortgage broker in a networking group that I was in was leaving the group. So that spot was becoming available. And I was like, oh, well, I already have experience in sales. I still love people, I still love money, and I still love helping people. So I went up to him and I said, how can I do this? I want to, what's the actual process? Because now I wasn't going from zero. I had experience. I had a clientele, which, believe it or not, when I switched over, some of them came with me.
Oh, I have no doubt.
But for me at the time, I'm like, really? You trust me to recommend skincare and your mortgage? That blew my mind. But what came across to people was my honesty and my genuine wanting to help them. So I was qualified in mortgages. They trusted me for one thing, so they switched over and trusted me for another. You say it doesn't surprise you, but it totally blew me away that they made that leap.
Well, I mean, it's all about trust.
It is.
Right?
That was the answer that came back every time.
It's all about trust. There's no doubt. I mean, you've seen this countless times in the military where you get posted somewhere and you don't go online looking for your realtor. You don't go online for your mortgage broker or your mechanic, right? You say, hey, Beach, who do you use for your mechanic?
That's exactly what you do.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I trust you and I know that you've already you've dumped the ones you haven't liked or whatever else. So you wouldn't have this person as providing any service if they weren't quality.
Right.
And it's the exact same thing. Now, I just want to pick at this a little bit because it's sales, it's building a clientele, but do you find now that it's less so because you've got this sort of client base, this loyalty, whatever? Do you still have to go out, and is it a constant effort to continue to expand a client base, or have you just got enough clients, or have you're well established enough now that it's a different it's more of a maintenance by, say, growth?
No, it's always growth, I think.
Okay.
But part of it is because so now what I do is I am on a journey to help people find their happier, to live their best life. Mm-hmm. And so that's cyclical. Like, people, I'm always there. People have the podcast to go to when they need. But the courses and the training and the coaching that I do, I find that's cyclical, and people only need it only go for it when they're ready. Right? You have to be ready to ask for help and say, I'm willing to do the work, because it's personal growth. It can be uncomfortable. It's not fun. But usually what happens is people get to a spot where they're like, I need something different. And who am I going to go to get it? So people could listen to the podcast for 3 years, and I don't even know they're listening. And then I offer one course, or I mention, I have a coaching spot open, and they're ready. So I find that there's that side of it, but also I think my mission is to help as many people as I can, because I think the more people who learn to love their life and live their best life, they have more to give other people. So there's more, just by helping one mom, I can help a whole family because she's changing the discussion around the dinner table. Our kitchen table discussions, I'm hoping that, my son, when he's interacting with his friends, he'll be like, no, you don't talk about yourself like that. What's the good in this? What's the win in this? How can we turn this around? How can we learn from this? So my mission is to help as many people as I can. And I think in order to do that, you can't get comfortable. You have to keep going outside your comfort zone and saying, who else needs to hear this message? Who else is ready to live their best life? Because I think we all want to, but we're just not all ready to do the work to get there.
So where did the idea for the podcast and everything else associated with helping people find, their best version of themselves and happiness, like how did this come into being?
So we've talked about my life. I've had a great life. I've had tons of adventure, but I was at a conference and the speaker said, "What's the dream in your heart?" And everybody at the conference seemed to know the answer except for me. And I just felt this big gaping hole. Like I had an okay life. Like I had a good life. But was I really living my best life? And I realized that I took that question, what's the dream in your heart? And I thought about it a lot. And I realized that I think you can't have a dream in your heart unless you learn to love yourself. And that scared the crap out of me. So I started with, how about I learn to like myself and get to know myself? And I realized that in the military, part of the reason that it was so good for me and I thrived is because everybody told me what they expected of me. So in order to get the next promotion or the next job, here are the things that I need to see from you. So I just showed up and I learned what I needed to learn and I did the best I could and I got rewarded with the next job, the next promotion, the next adventure. And that worked for me. But what I didn't learn in all of that, so then you end up being self-employed and there's nobody telling you exactly how to get to the next level. And I realized that I was sort of comfortable and I was just kind of, I was doing mortgages. I loved my clients. My clients loved coming, like they would come back to me when they were ready and it was enjoyable, but it was coasting. It was comfortable. I didn't feel like I was living my best life. And so this question, what's a dream in your heart, and this decision to learn to like myself, because love felt really uncomfortable in the beginning, I decided I didn't tell anyone, and I went on my own adventure to say, okay, who am I, and what do I really want, and what do I want to do in this life? And I got to know myself. And after the 4 months that I gave myself to figure this out, I started to realize that maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe there was other people out there who came to this conclusion that they were meeting other people's expectations and showing up for other people and not necessarily being true to themselves and shining as brightly as they could. And so that's when the podcast came about. It was literally, Chris, it was my therapy for myself to say, okay, what if other people feel this? And what if I could help one other person by being humble and sharing what I considered was, my little adventure. I thought I read something by Brene Brown. It was a quote, actually it was by Catherine Center, I think. And she said, you need to be brave with your life so others can be brave with theirs. And I thought, oh crap. I just want to stay in my comfortable little world. Right. But what I realized on that journey is I love helping people and I could help more people if I sucked it up and put myself out there. And that's how it started. It started in March of 2020 when the world was shutting down and people needed a positive voice and a reminder that how to take care of themselves. And a little glimmer of hope, I think, is how it all started. And I started out being very humble. My very first podcast, I stammered and stumbled and I said, I'm your horse. And from there on, I started a blooper reel at the end of every podcast because I'm real, I'm goofy, I am so imperfect, but I have found my happier, and I continue to find my happier and work on myself. And I'm like, if I could give this gift just even to one other person, then that's what I have to do. I have to keep going and keep putting my goofy self out there so other people can just be inspired and find their joy, their best life.
I'm curious how do you start the journey of getting to know yourself after this conference, and in that journey, because you've been very open about this in your podcast about you as a people pleaser. Did that come out? Did you realize that during this getting to know yourself to find that thing? Like, how does that journey even begin? And you say, okay, I'm gonna figure this out.
It came in journaling for me. So it was this honest conversation with myself about how I felt about things. And what happened is I came home from that conference and I gave myself 4 months, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just said, you got to get to know you. And that happened for me through journaling, where I started having opinions and realizing that sometimes I say yes to things that I really don't want to because I know it makes that person happy. But in the inside, I don't feel good, and I actually resent that person. And that's on me. That's not on them because I said yes. And so it was just this really, who am I and what do I want? What brings me joy? And when I say yes, if I say yes to please you, then I acknowledge that, and I'm not allowed to feel sorry for myself. Like I just kind of like if I'm saying yes, I'm acknowledging I'm saying yes because I want to give this gift to you. And I've tested that time and time again. And when you take ownership over how you feel and you accept yourself, I think that's a huge one, is accepting that I'm not perfect, and maybe that's a petty feeling, but I'm not going to judge myself for it. It's who I am, and how am I going to deal with it? Am I going to let myself wallow in it, or am I going to say, okay, you don't really want to do this, but it means a lot to this other person, and I love this other person, so I'm going to make that decision. And once I make that decision, I'm all in. So there's no passive aggressive. Not to say that I still don't have those moments, right? Like, let's be very clear. My husband does not live with the perfect person, but it's acknowledging it and learning from it, and constantly saying, how could I do that better for me? But also for that other person. So when I show up in an experience, I want to show up as me, and be okay with my imperfections, and be honest about it with myself. If nobody else, I'm honest with myself.
How did you decide on the format of the podcast? I mean, I love it, but I also recognize the amount of work that you put into, especially just the you providing commentary on a podcast, right? You're not interviewing somebody. Mm-hmm. It's like 10 minutes of like, let me share this with you. And it's not humming and hawing. It is like solid, well thought out content. And that is a ton of work to craft that kind of content for a listener. So how did you decide to go down that path? And I know you also interview and everything else, but those pieces I find particularly fascinating because of, I can't imagine how much work they are.
They are a lot of work. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it helped that the world shut down. But I had decided on the format of the podcast before the world shut down, before it actually launched.
Okay.
And like I say, it was me sharing what I learned in my reading. So my husband had said to me years ago, you're that person who reads those self-help books so we don't have to. And you just share what you got out of it, like the Cliff Notes. And I often, you can ask anybody, I will often say, have you read this book? People don't want to read that book. They just want the Cliff Notes. And so essentially what I started doing is saying, I've learned, for example, one of the things I really feel strongly about is gratitude, and the other one is small wins. And when you were talking about the Grey Cup and hoisting the Grey Cup, and that is such a beautiful representation of small wins, because once you win that game, the victory's over. And so if you didn't celebrate all those days that you got out of bed when you didn't want to get out of bed to go to practice, or the fact that the eating habits that it takes to be an elite athlete, those kind of things. Like, if you don't celebrate all those amazing things that you did day in and day out, then you forget to enjoy the journey. And so that's a big one for me. And so the first time I talked about small wins, it was explaining to people how, like, I'd been doing this reading, and this concept came up about, it was actually 2 different books where it talked about success builds momentum. And how you get success is acknowledging those little things that you do day in and day out as an athlete, as a person, as a leader, as a spouse, all those things. Like, you don't always feel like doing the stuff that you want to do, but you know what? You did it. And it feels so good to celebrate that and honor that. That's part of who you are. When you commit to a goal, you go for it. And not every day is easy, and not every day is a win, but there is a win in every day. So things like that. And then I learned something else, and I share that. And it's growth for me. It's a lot of work. It's like writing a paper in university. Honestly, it's a presentation. It's a presentation. In the beginning, it was a presentation every week.
Yeah.
So it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's polishing. I like to talk. I think that's pretty obvious. But what happened was I had to start taking notes and polishing it, because I really wanted to just give people the most bang for their buck. It also helped that my husband is an engineer, and he edited me. And so when I got verbose, he just cut it out.
Okay.
So I learned very quickly to not be verbose. I still am. But in my podcast, when I create the episode, do I need to say this again? I already said that once. What is the bite-sized piece that I can give somebody who's riding the bus to work to help make their day more beautiful, or give them something powerful to think about, so that they can work on themselves in those small moments? And that, yeah.
Now, I guess a couple questions on the topic of happiness. And I'll include these just in the same question. So what have you seen, or what have you sort of noticed through your research and reading, that are some of the biggest impediments to people finding that happiness? And have you noticed any difference between men and women, and what those impediments might look like, or what happiness looks like to them, if it could even be categorized that broadly, or is it so individual that that doesn't make sense?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever really thought about happiness by gender. I think of it more, it's a personal journey. So nobody else can make you happy. Nobody else can give you happiness. You have to choose to enjoy moments and appreciate things. So male or female, I think it's about knowing yourself and accepting yourself. So getting to that loving yourself is you love the imperfect person that you are, and you start to learn to be okay with your personal idiosyncrasies. So just because you are a retired Army officer doesn't mean that doesn't put any restrictions on you. It's about, what does Chris want to do now in his life? And absolutely, you're going to look back on all your experiences, and it is who you are. It's part of who you are. But it's realizing, but what does Chris want to do now in his phase of life that feels authentic to who he is? And not feeling like just because you wore the uniform, or just because you're a dad, or just because you're Canadian, that you can only do certain things. It's really about connecting with, who am I and what is my purpose on the earth right now, and what can I do with that? But so I think knowing that about yourself and saying, this is how I want to show up in the world, and waking up every day and saying, I get to choose how I show up in the world, and here's how I choose to show up in the world. And then the caveat to that is lovingly accepting your imperfection as you bumble through and figure out your way, because it's not like I just decide, boom, this is what I'm going to do, and it's easy and everybody just lines up to help this happen. You'll be challenged, and you learn to set boundaries, and you learn to ask for things that you need, and you seek out opportunities to really enjoy your life and give. And that's one of the things I love about your podcast, is that you're showing parts of people that I don't even know if they've seen in themselves until you ask a certain question. And, I've heard that a few times in the podcast where people are like, oh, wow, that's a great question. I never thought to ask myself that. And so the more we learn about ourselves, the more we show up and ask for our happiness. And it's because it's a decision that we make to enjoy the moment. So like I was saying, like maybe this isn't where I thought I'd be right now, but it's where I am right now, and being appreciative and grateful for all the blessings that I do have, instead of focusing on, well, I thought I'd have this, and I thought I'd be here, and I thought I would have done that. But this is where you are, and loving what you have, but still working towards what you want.
Do you do anything on transition out of the military? And I mean, there's obviously a lot of natural fits with your service, but I think a lot of what you just outlined are some of the main things that people struggle with when they're leaving something like the military that is so all-encompassing, and so many people have been in it. Really, it's the one thing they did in their adult life, their profession, and leaving that. And I have lots of conversations with people about transition, probably more than anything, simply because I've written down my experiences, because I don't think mine are unique. I think what we tend to fail to do is share our experiences widely, so other people realize that what they're feeling or what they're going through is not unique. But a lot of what you just said about happiness sort of resonates on the transition front. So do you get involved at all, or have you just sort of used that, what you've learned in helping people transition out of, whether it be the military or some other kind of formative part of their life?
Yeah, I mean, I've never targeted that, but I definitely have had this conversation with people about getting ready for that next step and finding clarity for themselves, even applying for a new job. So breaking it down and saying, okay, but what about that job appeals to you? Like, yeah, promotion is great and moving on is great, but what about it appeals to you? Is it the leadership? Is it the teamwork? Is it just the reward of getting it that you're going for? Because let's talk about what you want over the next 2 years. And so, not specifically directed, like I said, but very much I love helping people journal their way into getting to know themselves, so they can confidently ask for what they want and what they need, in the sense that if you know your strengths and what your passions are, it's easier. Then you show up in a job with so much more energy and motivation, because it aligns with what you want. And even if you've figured out that a part of that job is not your favorite, but you take that job knowing that you said yes to the job, that's part of it, you're going to look at that aspect slightly differently, because it's like, no, I know I don't love doing this, but I'm not going to resent it because it's part of the whole package. And I chose this job because of all these other things that fit who I am right now. This is what I want to experience right now. So it's beautiful helping people discover what they want, and especially the military, I think, because we're so used to being told what job is next for us, or only having a choice between 2 or 3, and we choose we ask for the least of the 3 evils or whatever. But getting out of the military you have so many options, it's overwhelming if you don't know what you are looking for personally in life.
Have you looked at or thought about like the power of culture as an impediment to people finding their happiness. And I mean, the military is an easy example where, I continue to bump into people who are still serving who don't look happy at all, in the least. And, everybody's got unique situations, there's no doubt. I can't help but think that this sort of powerful culture that the military builds of devotion and dedication, and if I were to, leave or retire, then that sort of abandonment or quitting the organization in some way. I'm wondering if you've thought about that. I mean, other than your own personal experiences serving, but if you've seen that at all, whether it be the actual military example or other powerful cultures that become sort of this impediment to people finding their what's going to make them happy.
It's in our culture to fit in and be what other people want us to be in order to get ahead.
Like Western culture, just in general?
Yeah. And if we look at our teenagers, high school, they have to do certain things and fit in, and if you don't fit inside that box, it takes a really special teacher,
right,
to allow you to be you, when the box is how our culture wants us to be. So I think that, especially I'm with you, I see a lot of people in the military stay past their happy point.
Yeah.
Because whether it's fear, fear of what's next, staying in because I need to make this much of a pension. But I think it's fear. I think it's fear and not knowing who I am outside the military, because I identify so much with the rank and position that I am. And I had this discussion with my husband a couple of years ago, and when you see people leave bitter and they taint a whole beautiful career because at the end they stayed too long and got bitter, and that taints their vision of that whole amazing career that they had. And so we had this discussion where I said, please don't stay to that point. I'm going to call you on it. When you start getting disillusioned and start down that complaining, we need to talk about what's next for you, because I just think for me, when I left, it was early enough that I wasn't as scared. I had been there a long time, so I identified with being a naval officer. But I think somebody with a 30-plus career, holy cow, that is how you've identified for so long. I'm an officer. I'm a naval officer. I'm an engineer. But what else are you? And you often haven't taken the time to discover what else you are. So I said to him, please don't get to that point, because I think people have beautiful careers and they taint it by staying too long.
I love the what else are you, because I think there's a couple of aspects to that. There's the journey that you went on through journaling to sort of get to know yourself better. So those are the things that are maybe less obvious, but there's things that are really obvious. You're a parent, you're a spouse, you're a friend, and those are actually, I think, the things that are pretty easy to vector in on and say, okay, am I the spouse that I want to be or should be? Mm-hmm. Am I the parent that I want to be or expect myself to be? Whatever that looks like. So there's definitely a far deeper dive to be made into this, but I also think that sometimes people miss the forest for the trees and just go, okay, am I these bigger sort of macro titles? Am I what I want to be in those? Because those are pretty easy start points to start your analysis in those other sort of roles that you play in life.
But then also, what kind of a parent do you want to be? Do you want to be the parent that coaches, or do you want to be the parent that drives, picks up 5 other kids to go to practice, or do you just love watching the game? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real good key into where do you want to spend your time and energy. And if you start to resent your work because you're not getting to do those things, that's part of the self-discovery is, who am I? How do I want to show up in this role? that I have. And again, I think it goes back to choice, because often we get so busy being who we think we're supposed to be, we don't take time to say, if I could decide, how would I want this to look? Like like you say, like what kind of a spouse do I want to be? And am I hands-on, or am I just date night, or am I absolutely, we have supper together every night, like everything stops so that the family's around the table? Those kind of questions, I think a lot of people don't analyze and say, what's important to me, or ask their spouse, what's important to you, so that you feel loved and supported, or your kids, like, do they need you at everything, or would they just love it if you just did this, those kind of things, right? And I think it's those discussions that we don't have and haven't been taught to have, is the analysis, like I always, when I talk about reflection and review as one of my happiness tools, I always talk about after action reports in the military, and saying, okay, the event's over, what went well, what could I do differently next time? And we can do that personally. I do that after every summer. Was how could I have made my summer better? And did I make the best use of that time where, schedules are different, kids are around, those kind of things. So for me, it's checking in with yourself and saying, how could this be better? How could I improve? And what did I love? Like, celebrate the amazing experience that you just had, because even if next summer looks the same, it won't be the same. So just learning and getting to know yourself through all your experiences, I think that gets you closer to knowing who you are.
So how do you personally, how have you learned to implement that change? So if you look at your summer, you say, okay, what went well? What do we need to improve upon? So there's the observation, and you've seen this in the military before, right? We do the after action review. You look back on something and say, that could have gone better. But where the real change has to happen, that tends to be where it gets difficult, right? Because you can identify a problem and say, yes, okay, that part of the exercise went poorly. This part of the vacation, yeah, like everybody knows it went wrong. You sit around, you talk about it, and you identify it. But then what are the tools that you found to actually take that observation and make it meaningful, drive change with it?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to journaling again.
Yeah.
Because I think you can have a conversation around the table, but then it's also connecting with yourself to say, like, let's say, for example, a family holiday, and all three of you have an opinion on what went wrong then, but it's really checking in with yourself and saying, okay, what would I like? And then hearing the other two voices and saying, okay, next time, what if we try this? Or like really it's the conversation. It is literally, but I think it starts with you personally knowing exactly what bothered you about it. Or I maybe not even exactly, but there was something there that triggered you, or you didn't like, or let's say by day 7 you were exhausted, and really maybe next year you just want to book in a no day where everybody does their own thing. Right?
Yeah.
And it's that, but I think it's the reflection and saying, knowing what you need and realizing, oh, maybe that's not what my spouse needed, and saying, okay, what's our win-win here? And so, but I really honestly think it comes back to being honest with yourself and not thinking that, okay, well, we'll make it better so that 1 out of the 3 people are happy next year. It's really being honest about how do you feel? What does each person need? Getting them to become aware of that, and then having that discussion saying, okay, what's the solution? What's the win-win for all of us? You can imagine the way I talk, some of the discussions at our dinner table. I'm sure my husband and son some days are just like, can we move on, please? And I'm like, no, like this matters. And for me, what I've learned is to use my voice. And so learning to set boundaries and say, that's too many people for me. I'm peopled out. So how about you go off and do that, and I'm just going to have a quiet night at home. And it was a huge realization for me, and a huge win to be able to ask for what I needed. So instead of thinking I have to go along with the family because that's what families do, it's using my voice to say, that actually doesn't work for me, because now I'm going to be wiped out for the next 5 days, instead of if I just take one night off and I have the house to myself and I do whatever I need to do to rejuvenate myself, then I can wake up the next day and whatever's on the agenda is on the agenda. I'm ready for it. But being able to know myself enough to say, I can't do everything that you do. I cannot be around as many people as you can be around. So the discussions, the self-awareness and the discussions, and then just trying something new, saying, okay, well, next time I want to try this. And being brave enough to say it. I think that's like, how do you really do it? It's being brave enough to say it.
That's good. Was going to be my next question, is because it does seem like we've talked about a couple of these pieces, and I'll bring them together. Right, we talked about teens and fitting into society, and sort of it becomes very difficult if you're coloring outside the lines for a whole bunch of reasons. And what I just heard you say is that the importance of honest communications is central to this, right? In using your voice and expressing what you need, and making sure that others can do the same, so you can find that space as a family, as a team, whatever, to operate in. But those societal norms, they become one of the biggest things to overcome, right? About being honest and saying, I don't want to do that, or that's not what I need. And it doesn't mean you get to do that all the time, right? Like, we're both in the military. Sometimes you got to get on with it. But I think that honest communications is, for me, it's certainly, there's been lots of times in my life where it's been very difficult to try and be, say, like, no, I don't want to do that. I have no interest in doing that. But you just kind of go with the flow and get on with it, despite the fact that it's really, you have no interest in doing it.
Well, and I think, and so two things come into play there, and I love how you said it way more succinctly than me, which is why editing is such a beautiful thing in podcasting. But it's the fact that, first of all, it's celebrate when you do stand up for yourself and you use your voice, right? And honor that you did that. It did not feel good. It was uncomfortable. I may have hurt someone's feelings by saying, no, thank you, I'm not in.
God, that's going to be hard though, right?
It is.
You're celebrating something that doesn't make you feel good.
Well, okay, but celebrating that you were brave.
Right.
So you're not celebrating that it didn't feel good. You're celebrating that you did something that you genuinely did for yourself. Because we often want other people to change. It's so much easier if everybody could just know what I need and give it to me, right? But honoring, so because I think the celebrating those small wins, like I talked about earlier, like celebrating that was hard to do, but I did it. And then the other thing is just knowing that you're also modeling for the people around you that it's okay for them to set boundaries as well, that you can honor that, because the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it, the more other people realize that they're allowed to do it too. So I found that the less I judged myself and I'm like, okay, this is what's best for me and I can do this, and it might be uncomfortable, but it's being honest. Then what I find is somebody else might set up a boundary, and initially I'll be like, oh, they don't want to come over, or like I feel rejected or hurt or whatever. And I'm like, hold on, I get to honor their boundaries because I appreciate that they love me enough to be honest with their boundaries. So a true no is so much more comfortable than a dishonest yes. So you do something, but you don't really want to be there. And that's what I was saying earlier, when if I say yes because I want to do this for you because it brings you joy, then I'm all in. I do not get to be passive aggressive. I do not get to resent you. I chose to show up for that, so I'm all in. And it is so empowering. And when somebody else sets a boundary with you, it can hurt, but then you learn to honor it, and you the more you stop judging yourself, the more you stop judging others, and it is just a beautiful place to be. You get to honor their uniqueness when they're brave enough to show it to you.
I wrote this down earlier. I'll circle back to it because you mentioned it again about the acknowledging and celebrating the small things. I found that I am very quick to just marginalize those sort of things and skip right past them, right? As opposed to looking at it for, like right size it. I mean, it's a small thing. You can still celebrate it. You don't have to celebrate it like it's the birth of a child or something like that, graduating from, from high school or like a big milestone, but it doesn't mean it's not worthy of celebrating. And I find that difficult because I just look at it and go, whatever.
It's part of doing business, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Whatever. Sure. But I can, as you're explaining it, I can absolutely see how you start to establish that habit of acknowledging and celebrating in whatever small way, like that becomes this foundation or this real change in how you view things when you start to celebrate small things as opposed to waiting for those like the huge moments. I'm only going to celebrate those.
Right. Yeah. Because that's part of enjoying the journey.
Right.
Right? I always tell the story of my first 10-mile run, and that it didn't just happen. There were days I did not want to run, right?
Listener, you should see Beej's face right now. It's just like,
No, the days where you really don't want to put your running shoes on and go out, and it's raining, and, we were spring break, New York City, it's pouring rain, and I was due for one of my training runs, my 10-kilometer training run. It is the last thing that I wanted to do. But I did it because I did not want the bus of shame to pick me up during the race. Because if you were too slow, the bus of shame picks you up, right? They had to open the roads kind of thing. And like the celebrating that and going, I did that. I did not want to do that. So there's a bunch to celebrate in there. First of all, that I did it. Second of all, that it actually felt good. So then it builds my confidence for the actual race. And third, I ran my own personal 10K in Central Park. That's kind of cool. It's a great memory. But had I not done it, had I went, no, I just want to go to the zoo with my family, that's easier. And so it's about loving those moments and celebrating them, because then I find the small wins and the gratitude overlap, because you start to learn to appreciate just family dinners where you belly laugh.
Right.
I'm so glad that I made it home in time for supper, because if I hadn't, I would have missed that moment. So I said no to that person who wanted to start a discussion on my way out of the office, and I made it home for supper, and I got to have that moment. And in celebrating that you set that boundary at work so that you have this other beautiful moment. And it just reinforces those positive things in your life. When you could look at it as acknowledging it. Like I say, celebrate it. But for me, I celebrate acknowledging might be a more comfortable start, Chris, right? All right, I did this. That needed to get done. I did it. Those kind of things, because it is it's about enjoying the journey, the whole ride, not just the Grey Cup.
You've mentioned journaling a couple of times. And so for people who struggle with journaling, and let's just say that that's just not their cup of tea.
Just some unknown person.
Yeah. Phone, asking for a friend. It's something that I'm not particularly good at. I actually have started doing a bit of a newsletter on my Substack as a journaling light thing every few weeks, which has been fun. But for people who, for whatever reason, journaling doesn't work for them, are there other tools to achieve a similar effect or outcome that you've found?
Oh, I would so love to be a people pleaser and say yes. Yes. I don't know. All I can say is I know it works for me, and I love helping people discover the power of journaling. I personally haven't found anything else as powerful. I do think that, like you say, if you're writing sort of a blog type thing every once in a while, I think it's introspective and there's something there. But I think when you're doing it publicly, you're not as honest as you would be with yourself. So it's a type of journaling, I think. And I love that you asked this question, because a lot of people, it was hard for me to say, I honestly believe the fastest way to self-acceptance and love and happiness is journaling. That I've learned that I'm just going to own that. It makes people uncomfortable. But I honestly think that it's that introspection and that honesty with yourself. And it doesn't always have to be, it doesn't have to start out being deep. It can just start out being, this happened today and this is how I felt about it. It's just acknowledging it. When I start people really slow, I start with small wins. Start with 3 gratitudes or 3 small wins. And what it is because if you acknowledge what you're grateful for in a day, you're getting to know yourself. Like, oh, I loved after I mowed the lawn, the smell of freshly cut lawn, or I ran into so-and-so at the grocery store. Man, I love those, those random encounters that just make you reflective on something, those kind of things. And as you do that, you just start to see more of yourself when you do it. So I have to say, in my experience, journaling is the most effective way to get to know yourself and find your true happiness. But you can start small, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a journal like when we were kids, like Dear Diary. Today I started my day with granola, right? Like it could just be one random thing. And I tell people, when you don't feel like it, just say, I'm not into this today. Because you are acknowledging your own personal feelings that day. It can be that small. It can start that small. And it's just a habit to get to know that you are there for yourself. So then when something big happens, I have people who have 2 journals. And one is when they just want to vent. And the other is just kind of daily life, like, oh, this went well today, or this frustrated me today. But the full on, I feel completely offended or overrun, or I'm not seen at work, that kind of stuff, that venting, that can go for them in a completely different journal. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So yeah, short answer is sorry, Chris, but I think it's one of those uncomfortable things that makes a huge difference in life.
I will pass it on to my
your friend. Yes,
yeah,
please.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, B, you're the one who told me about there's somebody who did is it 1,000 things, like little things, like the arrow for the gas tank and stuff.
Yes, what is his name?
We talked about that before. I don't know if I ever.
He has a book. I put it in my summer reading list. He's actually, I think he's from Toronto, believe it or not. And he did 1,000 awesome things. And he just sat down and he made a blog about 1,000 awesome things. And I go there every once in a while just to find inspiration, because to me, it ties into gratitude, like those just acknowledging cool things in life that make our lives easier or bring us joy or bring a smile to our face. And there's some pretty funny ones in there. And yeah, like we were talking about the gas tank arrow, brilliant. I love that. I love that one, and the story about how that came about, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Where are you going to take the podcast from here? Like, what's the next sort of expansion in this? Because you clearly have a deep passion for helping people. The podcast is great, and you've got a number of other things going on. But how do you continue to build this, or what's your sort of vision for building this as you go forward?
So, like I mentioned, it started out as a passion project, and it really was me on my journey. And then it kind of turned into, okay, how do you create a framework so that other people can do it, can replicate it? And so I started creating courses and learning that, coaching works too, accountability, that kind of thing. So right now it's courses, coaching, accountability. And I think what's coming up next is a community. So one of the things I've discovered is that who you surround yourself with when you want to change something, it's Atomic Habits is James Clear. And
Great
he
book.
talks about when you want to make a change, you surround yourself with people, like-minded people, because it's really tough to be vegan on a beef farm, kind of thing. and it's so true. Right. And one of the things that I find as I'm coaching people and helping people is they need to be reminded why they're doing this, because it can be uncomfortable. Life is busy, and it's fitting yourself in is essentially what it is making that decision to connect with yourself and find you're happier. It's fitting you in, and we're not really taught to do that. We're about keeping up with the Joneses and being 100% at work and being an awesome parent, and then being on this volunteer council, and it's all these things, and we often fall to the bottom. It's that whole put your oxygen mask on first. It's great in theory, but it's really uncomfortable to do unless you kind of hit something in life that kind of screams at you got to take care of yourself. So what's next is a community where people can come and find the accountability, but then they can just support each other and be around people who struggle. Because nothing I teach is rocket science. It's habits, it's mindset. But if you're not around like-minded people, it's tough to keep that stuff top of mind. And so that's where I want to go next, is just creating a space where people come and celebrate the small wins. Just remind you to celebrate and share and be around people, because your story can inspire someone else. And you might think that your goofy small win doesn't really matter, but that is exactly what somebody else needs to hear to go, yeah, I got this.
What platform have you found really helps build that community?
Okay, I'm the worst social media person in the world. I'm an in-person person. I'm face-to-face. Right. I love being around people, but that limits where you create your people. So for me, I haven't found social media. It drains my energy. It doesn't build my energy. So I do meetups on Zoom where I can at least see people's faces and read emotions and let people share their voice, and instead of just written on social media, that kind of thing. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm struggling with the social media world because I read energy, and I need to see the people. I need to see the faces. I need to see the slumped shoulders or whatever kind of thing. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's this is why, almost all my podcasts so far have been in person, because it's just the connection's better. I think like you said, you just pick up on these different cues from people, which then feeds the next sort of question or next tangent, and it's very powerful. But certainly you get scale out of the other one.
And that's the thing,
right?
Is you can help more people, right? And it's challenging too, because West Coast to East Coast, that's a 4.5 hour if you get Newfoundland, but it's a big time zone difference. So it's still challenging, but yeah, absolutely. Then you get to connect people who never would have crossed paths in life before, which is very neat.
Yeah, so. It absolutely is. Beej, this has been great. It's been, the process itself has been wonderful for me, because although we first met, I think, in the summer of '93, this ability to reconnect and to listen to your podcast has been wonderful. And I'll just sort of pass the final word to you if there's anything you'd like to share with the listener at the end of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this opportunity, Chris. It's been a lot of fun, and reconnecting on such a fun level. And the questions that you ask, it's been a total journey. I think I've done a lot of work on getting to know myself, and yet you managed to ask questions that still made me introspective and realize there's more to learn. And I think that's what's important, is honoring the beautiful person that we are, no matter what stage in life we're at. We get to start from now. So everything that we've lived is beautiful, and acknowledge it. Well, I guess it's not all beautiful, but it is part of who you are, but it doesn't define who you are. So getting to know yourself and finding what lights you up, and realizing that happiness is a choice, and it's a choice daily. And it doesn't mean that every day is awesome and fun, but what it means is when you realize that you get to choose how you look at any situation or how you react to any situation, then you're in the driver's seat. So you didn't get what you wanted, but you can still decide to make the best of it and find the beautiful moments in it and acknowledge it. So the more you accept control or responsibility for the beautiful life that you get to live, the more you're going to find. And when you do that, you get to give that to other people as well. So sometimes working on yourself is a gift to the people around you. And so if that's what it takes to motivate you to do the tough work, maybe journaling, it's worth it. And if your motivation has to be someone else, then let it be that. But whatever it is, just know that you are here for a beautiful reason, and it's your job to figure that out and do it the best you can.
That's a wonderful way to close. Thanks again for being on the show and being one of our Northern Sentinels.
Thanks for having me, Chris. This was awesome.
I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Bona. Please take a minute to subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack to get this and other content to help you citizen better. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.